Hello, good evening, and welcome. Good afternoon, Brother Stanislaus. How are you?
I'm well, Excellency. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Oh, good,
you
good.
had me you had me worried for a minute there because normally Brother Stanislaus is waiting in the green room to come on,
Yeah, yeah.
but he was a little a little late today.
A little late. Yeah.
And we've had a message from Bishop Kelly, who will be joining us, but they're currently under a tornado warning in Chicago, so he is currently crouching in his basement at the residence, and as soon as they sound the all clear, then God willing, he will be joining us for the broadcast. So, Brother Stanislaus, how was your week?
It was well, as usual, lots going on, but uh, lots going on in the church. I mean, the headlines continue to roll in. So, so yes. Well, how about your week?
Quite. Yes, not too bad. Not too bad. Thank you. Busy as always. Interesting in all sorts of other ways, in many respects. But yeah, it's not been too bad. Now, good evening and welcome to our viewers.
Sure.
Please do in the comments say hi and tell us where you're watching from. It's always interesting to know. Um, Question for you, because tomorrow is not an ordinary day. What tomorrow is what in the ordo tomorrow? No, what is tomorrow in the ordo? Oh gosh. What in the ordo is tomorrow? So there's a question for you. Do tell us in the comments what you think tomorrow is. We know it's Sunday, of course, but what is it liturgically? All sorts. Now, this week, I hope some of you will have noticed that theoldroman.com went live. I'm just going to see if I can. There we are. Theoldroman.com went live, our new website for Old Roman TV. And on it, you will find, I hope that you will use it for getting all your news and latest info. Let's just share some of the greetings we have here. We have Anne there from Ireland. Welcome, Anne. Father Tom is watching. Father Thomas. Presumably he's crouching down somewhere as well. Read the tornado warning. Father Chris is watching as well. So good evening to him. Barbara from Brighton. Good evening to you and welcome. Okay, so so theoldroman.com went live, and essentially what it gathers together is from across the world, or I should say initially anyway, the English-speaking world, all articles and news and headlines relevant to Catholicism and of particular interest to traditional Catholicism. And these headlines will inform our discussions going forward on Old Romans Unscripted. So please do take note of theoldroman.com, and it's designed or meant to be visited every day and more than once every day, because the headlines just keep coming and coming. Oh, we've got an echo. Has your oh no, it's gone again. Let me just put that across the screen. There we go. So the web address is there, www.theoldroman.com. So all broadcasts that you're accustomed to watching on this channel are available through that website, together with any program notes. For example, the Challoner meditation that we share with every midday Angelus. The words for the Challoner meditation are now available at the website, as too is the homily from the daily Mass broadcast, as well as the Mass itself, and the Rosary in the evenings as well. So it's all there. So for anything related to us, please visit theoldroman.com. So there are lots in the headlines this week. It's a job to know really where to begin our discussion. For those of you who are wondering, tomorrow is in fact the feast of Our Lady of Perpetual Succor, with commemoration of the octave of St. John the Baptist, the fifth Sunday after Pentecost, and if you're being really traditional, the octave of St. John and Paul of Rome, martyrs as well. So that's what's in the order for tomorrow, Our Lady of Perpetual Succor. Perhaps more commonly known today as Our Lady Help of Christians, or Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Succor, of course, is a word that sadly has sort of drifted out of daily use in the English language, and help is not a bad translation of succor, but succor actually means more than just help, but it means, we might say, nourishment as well. So if you imagine a mother, we used the term suckle from, or suckle, meaning breastfeeding. Now, we're not saying, of course, we're not Our Lady of Breastfeeding, but Our Lady of Perpetual Succor, or perpetual nourishment, or source of help, source of strength and encouragement for us as Christians. A very great and popular devotion. The icon is also known as Our Lady of the Passion, because contained within the icon, in the corners of the icon, are the implements of our Lord's Passion. I didn't have time to arrange for a picture of the icon for the screen, unfortunately, but never mind. If you Google it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'll try and find one. Do you have much devotion to Our Lady of Perpetual Help, Brother Stanislaus?
Oh yes, she is under that. That's my tonsure anniversary date. Is on this feast day, the Mother Perpetual Help, and I have studied history of of the icon, but I guess it would be.
I think Brother's frozen there, so he will probably come back to us with any luck. But meanwhile, I'll just see if I can upload a picture of the icon. Now, one of the particularly, here we go. And one of the particularly interesting things about this icon, of course, which is a little bit obscured, unfortunately, by the title, but our Lord, you can normally see that the sandal of his foot looks as though it is about to drop off. But you can see too that our Lord is looking upwards towards the implements of his passion, notably, of course, the cross, held there by the angels, and Our Lady is holding him supportively, giving him encouragement, giving him strength, and that is the particular focus that we might have ourselves in venerating this sacred image. Now, it's quite an interesting history to the icon. I'll just fill in while Brother Stanislaus tries to come back to us. Let me just find. He's trying to come back to us there. It's a very interesting history of the icon. No, he's not coming back just yet, which I will try and share with you now. So according to the received tradition, a merchant acquired the icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help from the island of Crete and shipped it to Rome. Perhaps towards the end of the 15th century. During that voyage, a terrible storm arose, threatening the lives of all on board ship. The passengers and crew prayed to Our Blessed Mother and were saved. Once in Rome, the merchant, dying, ordered that the image should be displayed for public veneration. His friend, who retained the image, received further instructions. In a dream to his little daughter, the Blessed Mother appeared and expressed the desire for the image to be venerated in a church between the basilicas of St. Mary Major and St. John Lateran in Rome. The image, consequently, was housed at the church of San Matteo, or St. Matthew, and became known as the Madonna of St. Matthew. Pilgrims flocked to the church for the next 300 years, and great graces were bestowed upon the faithful. After Napoleon's troops destroyed the church of St. Matthew in 1812, the image was transferred to the church of St. Mary in Posterula, and remained there for nearly 40 years, and was almost forgotten and certainly neglected. But by divine providence, the image was rediscovered. In 1866, Pope Pius IX entrusted the image to the Redemptorists, who had just built the church of St. Alphonsus, down the street from St. Mary Major. As a boy, the Holy Father had prayed before the image in the church of St. Matthew. He ordered the public display and veneration of the image and fixed the feast of Our Lady of Perpetual Help as the Sunday before the feast of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist. In 1867, when the image was being carried in a solemn procession through the streets, a young child was cured, the first of many recorded miracles attributed to Our Lady of Perpetual Help. To this day, the Church of St. Alphonsus displays the icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help and welcomes pilgrims for prayer. So that's the history of this beautiful icon. We've lost Brother Stanislaus, it would seem, for the time being. Bless him, he's clearly having internet problems. I've always had a great devotion to Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Priests obviously have a very great devotion to Our Lady, being as we are adopted as her sons by virtue of our ordination. Some of you, of course, will be familiar with the tradition following a priest's first Mass, that he presents flowers to his mother and then to Our Lady, and sings the Salve Regina there before her image, and that making the point of his adoption by her as an alter Christus, being as he will live the rest of his life in persona Christi, and that he will, of course, be at the altar another Christ. And so priests have a particular devotion to Our Lady, and it varies, of course, between priests as to the particular title under which they have a particular devotion. For me, it is Our Lady of Perpetual Help, simply because that whenever I personally have had recourse to Our Lady's intercession, I particularly have approached her through that blessed title and received her assistance. So I certainly can personally recommend praying to Our Lady of Perpetual Help for any situation you may find yourself in which you need prayer and assistance. Now, Brother Stanislaus hasn't come back to us, but here we have Bishop Kelly. Good afternoon.
Hello.
How are
Good
you?
afternoon.
You're alive.
I'm alive. Yeah, it's been it's a weather event, as they say. We had the same last week, so the second time in 2 weeks. There was a tornado warning. I mean, we're right at the tip of Tornado Alley, and the lake effect doesn't really give us the things that you see down in Oklahoma and places like that. But it happens from time to time. There was a tornado last year that came in 3 blocks north of where I live, and basically just a beautiful tree-lined avenue just tore it into matchsticks. Some houses there wasn't any loss of life, thanks be to God, or anybody injured, but minor damage to houses. But it literally went down the street and took out the trees and cars.
Wow.
Yeah, so just before half an hour before the broadcast, the sirens went off, and I checked the telly and it said "Seek shelter now," and so I gathered the menagerie and down into the basement we went. So I discovered a leak for the first time ever. There's a leak, so I don't know. I have to get that looked into. But anyway, we're fine. The storm has passed. Calm has returned. So that's a good thing. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, tomorrow, of course, is the feast of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. So we were just about to hear from Brother Stanislaus about his own devotion to Our Lady of Perpetual Help. But he's having Wi-Fi problems. We had a Year of Spirituality conference earlier, and he was experiencing problems then. So with any luck, he'll come back to us. I know that he will if he can. But and then I've just given my own, as it were, personal testimony concerning my own experience, a particular devotion to Our Lady under this title. And I was explaining how all priests have a particular affection, of course, for Our Lady, being adopted by her sons in our role in Persona Christi. Do you have a devotion to Our Lady under this title, or perhaps another title?
My favorite title is Our Lady of Mount Carmel, but I do have devotion of Our Lady of Perpetual Succor through my grandmother. Actually, she had great devotion to Our Lady under that title, and there was a reproduction of the icon in what's called the Long Tower Church in Derry, which is built on the site of the original monastery of St. Columba, who on June 9th we just celebrated 1,500 years. And on the site of that monastery is built this wonderful church. I think I've shared some photographs online from my last trip back from there. But there's a plaque in the thing, the site of the high altar 559, something like that. It's but there is over to the on the epistle side, there is a small icon which is trimmed in silver of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, and certain people have devotion to that, and there's been some miracles attributed to the faithful who have prayed there. And actually just what they've done now, they still use the altar rails there, but just at the altar rails to the side, they've placed votive candles so faithful can light candles there to that particular reproduction of the icon. But I remember her standing as a really small child. She'd stand in her bedroom, which, I mean, she's several miles from it, but you could see the church from her house, and she would stand in the bedroom before she went to bed. And I'm of course like, Granny, what are you doing? She would say a Hail Holy Queen in the direction of the church, which had that icon, and she had a great devotion. And of course, the Redemptorist Fathers, as they were, had there were two great centres in Ireland, in Dundalk, in Southern Ireland, and in Belfast, in Northern Ireland. They had great novenas to Our Lady of Perpetual Succour, and I'm talking show-stopping stuff here. They would have about a dozen masses a day, right through the hours, from early morning to about 1 o'clock, and then they would add several evening. And they closed down all the streets where you could just park on the road, and there were ushers there to park. And it was, if you got there early enough, you could get into the church, and a sizable church it was. If not, you got into the monastery grounds, and it was through loudhailers. And they produced a booklet for this with various hymns and devotions. And they would have mass, and then they would have, I think they've stopped this practice, but they used to have evening devotions, Rosary, sermon, and benediction. And they would have confession perpetually, all the time, and thousands would come to it. If you ask any Catholic that comes from Belfast, the Challoner novena, they all know it, and it was something you went to, and it has changed. It changed even in my lifetime. I remember going there in my late teens and just thought, they reordered the sanctuary, which was one thing. They had a wonderful crow's nest pulpit where the Redemptorists would go up there in their imposing habit with the crucifix stuck in their belt because they were on mission, and preach these sermons. But that was torn down, and the sanctuary was reordered. Then they started this ecumenical thing. They invited a female Presbyterian minister to give a sermon. I could see in the context that it was, across the barricades in Northern Ireland at that time, and it was the time of the peace process and all that. But it really did take on a whole new flavour to it, and God knows what they're at now. But in its day, it was certainly something. So yes, I do have an attachment. I do have a devotion. When I lived in London, I think is it King's Road? There's a Catholic chapel there,
Mm-hmm.
King's Way or King's Road. I'm not sure. Just up from the Strand.
Yeah, that's right.
And they have a small reproduction of the icon in there, and it's not far from where I was studying on the Strand, and I used to go up there and often call in and say a prayer before that icon, actually. So yeah, I do, it's a wonderful, when you unpack it, and once you notice, that I love the story. I don't know how true it is, but if you notice the icon, and perhaps you've covered this, that if you look at our Lord, the sandal has fallen off one of his feet, and the story goes that he had a dream, perhaps of his passion. Well, you can kind of see it there. It's under the A, is obscuring it, but you'll see the sandal has fallen off his foot, and the pious legend is that he was sleeping and he had a foreshadowing of his passion, and he woke up disturbed, and the sandal had fallen off and Our Lady comforted him. That's a wonderful thing too. I mean, all of us have experiences of having nightmares when we were children and knocking on Mummy and Daddy's door saying, "I can't sleep, I've had a bad dream." And, the response is to console you, So I love that legend attached to it. I can't say how true it is to the iconography of it with the loosened sandal, I don't know. But for me, it's always been a help knowing that no matter how bad things are, how disturbing things are, how tumultuous life can be, that Our Lady is there, just as she was for our Divine Lord, ready to console and hold us in embrace. And the embrace in that icon is beautiful. It's second only to the icon of Vladimir.
I'm just seeing if I can bring
Should I keep talking?
clearer,
I can.
clearer, but yeah, you keep going. You keep going. Oh no, that's not it either. Well, actually, let's speak to the because I was trying to get the sandal, but I can't. But here, perhaps we can see more clearly the implements of our Lord's
Of the Passion, yeah. Mm-hmm. So perhaps it isn't just a pious legend. Perhaps that it was the writer's intention was to show us. And you notice our Lord is looking at the cross, and our Blessed Mother is looking at us. She's gazing out to us to invite us to our Lord, who's gazing upon the Passion. It's a wonderful invitation to embrace the suffering, not only the suffering, but the consequences of it, which is salvation. Yeah.
There we go. Lovely, beautiful. Now, before we sort of move on to other things, last week, of course, we didn't have you with us, but we had a perfect item that we were discussing, which was about the hoped for revival in the resurgence of the use of the mass rocks in Ireland of late. But perhaps you could tell us more about the history or the tradition of the mass rocks.
Well, I'm sure you covered it, but during penal times in Ireland, that the Catholic religion was forbidden, and it was penalty on death of anyone who would attend or hear or provide the Popish Mass. There were mostly English had the Jesuits, but we had a lot of the friars were mostly in charge in Ireland. We had Dominicans and Franciscans who went incognito and supplied at these mass rocks, and they found just in a wooded area or secluded area, a glen or a wooded area, they would find. There's lots of rocks in Ireland, especially on the west coast, but they would find something that was flat. And there they would gather through word of mouth, the faithful, and it was a place where they could hear Holy Mass. And it was a tradition, and those places were marked. And even after the lifting of the penal code or the easing of it, that people returned to those places as holy sites because, of course, they were hallowed by the fact that the Holy Mass had taken place there. There's an interesting place in Belfast, in Northern Ireland. It's just tucked in behind the Ulster Museum, which is, I suppose, the National Museum of Northern Ireland. But and it's on Stramillis Road, but it's called Friars Bush Cemetery. And it was a place where the Catholics were buried, and the graves go back through the 1700s and perhaps the late 1600s there. But there was a mass rock there, and of course there was a priest, a Franciscan friar, who was saying mass, and of course the redcoats showed up, and the pious legend again is as he raised the chalice, and who knows what part of it, but they shot him. And the precious blood was spilt on the ground. And later on, when the reestablishment of when penal laws were laxed, the Catholic bishop of Down and Connor asked if they could have that land. And they'd already started burying people there, because at that time it was on the outskirts of the city. And Catholics, wealthy Catholics, who had perhaps kept things secret or played along for a little bit, had already started burying themselves there because it was considered hallowed ground. Continued that, and it became a famous burial ground. And of course it's closed now because of limited space, but they do tours of it, and there are lots of interesting characters buried there. But that's part of the tradition of the Mass Rocks. And recently, because certainly in the south of Ireland, there have been quite draconian measures suppressing church attendance. We saw the footage of people being hauled out of a traditional Latin Mass parish by the police force. I mean, red coat, blue coat, who cares? They're still being persecuted for for practicing their religion. And so the faithful have gathered at these traditional sites, these Mass Rocks. If you go for a drive through the west of Ireland, you'll see signposts for them everywhere. They're quite common. But they've started to gather there. And interestingly, there's an old movie, and I want to say Martin Sheen is in it. I can't remember.
Oh yes, we talked about this.
I could be terribly.
Yeah, Martin Sheen is in it. The Catholics.
And they return to the Latin Mass and they go to a Mass Rock. Is that correct? Am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, it's the according to the film, Vatican III has happened. and the traditional Latin Mass has been banned, and there's this faithful community of monks off the west coast of Ireland somewhere who are still saying the Mass and are travelling back to mainland and utilising the Mass Rocks and saying Mass there and broadcasting the Mass over the radio. And Martin Sheen plays the Vatican investigator who basically goes to shut it down.
Familiar story. It might be worth a watch, actually. I was aware of it. I don't think I've seen it all the way through. I've been aware of the movie, but...
Last week's episode, folks, I did put the link to YouTube where you can watch the whole film.
Oh, okay.
So it is available on YouTube to watch, and it's called The Catholics. Yeah.
But perhaps this is a sign of things to come. That we're going to have to find these spaces where we can be free to practice our religion.
Yeah. So the film does have two titles. There's The Catholics, and then there's Conflict, or The Conflict. So you can find it, but it is available on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube.
Good.
It's well worth watching. It's a bit disappointing at the end, as they always are, but it's well worth watching. Oh, that's right. Yes, penance. That's right. Had also been suppressed in the futuristic church portrayed in the film. Well, we laugh, but
isn't that the truth?
Now, bearing in mind that I think the film dates from the early 70s, so it was post Vatican II, more or less. But interesting that it should. Interesting that it's the what's the word? But the concept behind it is still as relevant today as it was then.
Well, we're still dealing with Vatican II.
Yeah.
And the beast has only grown with years.
Yeah. Now, let's move on to a headline. So, how do I do this? Oh, yes. That's it. So, now there's a chap there who is very local to you. Cardinal Supich to conduct a visit of Vatican dicastery on behalf of Pope Francis. Now, this is the Congregation for the Clergy that he's going to investigate, apparently. Why do you think? Why do you think he's going there?
I wonder why. Because the clergy don't get it. They haven't paid their union dues. No, matter of fact, I think they're worried about the caliber of men who are joining the church, and they're not paid up members of the cultus of Vatican II. They, you know, they look back at history and see there's something else that time didn't start in 1962. They're willing to think for themselves. They want to escape the capsule of a time warp that is the 1970s with its dress and its music and its style of preaching, and the very fact. I mean, I was born in 1976. I was born in the middle of it. But these guys, they're born in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, it's ancient history to them, and they wonder why they're stuck in this capsule of the late 60s and mid 70s.
Well, I mean, that is the irony, of course. Every time these proponents of the new mass say, we have to be up to date, it's like, well, you're stuck in the 60s. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
With your polyester and your polyester vestments and your ceramic vessels and your guitar masses, singing Dominica Nika Nika. I mean, and this has been the tragedy, actually, because this is a phenomenon across all the Christian denominations. So that, for example, so in Catholicism, out went the Gregorian masses, and in came the guitar masses. In Methodism, out went the Wesleyan hymns, and in came the evangelical choruses. And across the board, and in the Church of England, out went hymns, ancient and modern, in came mission praise. And the thing is, though, in one respect, it's like you could kind of, go along with their argument if then they had continued to change. So, so they changed the hymnals in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s, but they didn't.
They didn't.
So, all this idea that it's all, new, it's like, well, no, it's not. I mean, it really is outdated. There is, the son of a parishioner here, said that, was caught watching one of our masses, and said that what he appreciated was the fact that it was traditional and not trying to be hip and trendy and modern. And he said, because, when you look at those churches that try to do that, they just come over really.
It's terrible. It's
really badly.
It's really I was going to say, the stuff in the 70s and 80s, but it was a bad pastiche of the music that was actually happening at the time. And
it wasn't even the good stuff.
No, it was terrible. And if you look at even the modern evangelical thing where they have this Christian rock, it's still a bad pastiche. I mean, some of it, they got a catchy hook here and there, what they fail to realize is that, if somebody wants to listen to that sort of music, they'll go on Pandora or YouTube, or turn the radio on in their car, or go out to a nightclub or to a bar, and they'll listen and enjoy that sort of music. And that's the experience when you're out there, maybe dating a girl and having a drink and all of that, and that that you're surrounded by the modern music, and that's the night out, right? When you go to church, you want and expect something different, something other, something that will lift you out of that mundane world and point you towards the heavens. And that's the ethereal beauty of Gregorian chant. is that it's a simple melody that's lifted, that will lift the soul towards God. I mean, you don't need to speak Latin, you don't need to read the notation, but if you sit in on a traditional monastic vespers, where they are reciting the Psalms, singing the Psalms, your soul lifts and rises and falls with the melody of the Gregorian chant, and it is absolutely a beautiful spiritual experience, even if you don't understand a word. They're praying on your behalf, so don't worry about it. They've got, as they say here, they got you. But let your soul just lift and fall with the beauty of the melody, and it cannot help but touch the depths of your soul and raise you to the heavens. And the same then, through the history of church music and even modern day music, with composers like our own Kevin Allen, friend of the show, who continues to do that. But right through, the Middle Ages, and of course Palestrina being the one that everybody knows, but right up through the Baroque and through classical times, even modernists like Messiaen can write beautiful church music. And people actually get it. I know a lot of evangelical folk. In fact, here in Chicago, there's a church. In fact, it used to be an old Roman Catholic church. That's right opposite the Moody Bible Institute, and it's a big evangelical school. But this is run by the Orthodox Church of America, and you get a lot of people wandering in out of curiosity, and some converts, But what they're struck by is the beauty of the music and the liturgy, and it lifts them out. Now, across the road, they're getting the praise and worship stuff and the bouncing ball going across the thing. But they really are, what converts them, what leads them to the truth, is the beauty of the liturgy and the music. And then they discover the truth after that, and they're led towards it. We have that as Catholics too. Why should the Orthodox bask in the the of that? Well, we have it, just as much as they do. But we don't promote it. We suppress it, It's crazy town.
I mean, so, the first thing I say to anyone, who hasn't been to Mass before, to the traditional Mass before, is, we have bilingual missalets and things we can give them. But I always say to them, just let it wash over you. Just sit and let the whole thing just wash over you. And they always are moved by it afterwards, and then hooked. But it is the beauty, it is the mystery, and God speaks. The Spirit moves in that, and people sense it. And we see this sort of with those sort of ethereal type spiritual songs and things. I mean, I'm thinking of Enya and things like that. But that kind of that's a reproduction. That's trying to reproduce the same thing, really. I always think I always hear Enya and think, I suppose if Hilda what's her name?
I know who you're talking about. The Angelus. Hilda von something guard. Anyway, yes, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. But I always think, when I hear Enya, I always think, it's if Hilda was alive today, that's maybe what
she'd be doing.
What she'd be doing.
Well, she'd have to learn Irish.
True.
Or Enya have to learn German.
Hilda von Bingenden. Hilda of Bingenden. Bingenden, is it?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
I have a
Yeah.
CD somewhere in a box, long forgotten, with stuff of, uh, inspired by or reproduced from Hilda. Interesting
Well,
character, actually. Um,
and in fact, there is a YouTube channel where somebody um, does covers of contemporary songs, but a la Hilda von Binghamton. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. I'll have to maybe for next week I'll line up a video because
all right, yeah.
it is really good. It is really good.
But you're right too, though. There's music that speaks to the soul. You know, the sort of the Christian rock gets the passions going, the feelings going. Yeah, yeah. You know, oh yeah, man, I'm for Jesus. Um, but things like Gregorian chant and the traditional music written for the traditional mass, that touches the soul rather than the feelings. And we could go off on Aquinas tangent here, but there is a big difference there, and that's always been my fear or caveat regarding the charismatic movement, is that it's too based in feelings,
Mm,
and that's not what we are as Catholics. Um, we're one who thinks, who prays, and who acts. And once you take the thinking out of that, it's you're missing a component. I mean, John Paul II even produced the document Fides et Ratio, which is probably the best thing he ever did. It's quite a good document, certainly if you're a philosopher. Um, but people forget that, and it's all about emotions. And we are swamped in today's society about feelings.
yeah.
They take precedent, and we forget that we are thinking beings. That's, it's Aristotle's three souls: the vegetative soul, the animal soul, and the rational soul. We are rational thinking beings. We can rise above our feelings. We can rise above, look at our feelings, and judge them. It's just because somebody tickles me in the side doesn't mean I'm happy. It's a it's a feeling. Um, we need to rediscover that, and quickly, because we've lost that in the past 50 years, and we've let the supremacy of feelings, and it's a dangerous, dangerous path, and we've been warned about it
Yeah.
by many, many eminent thinkers throughout the centuries. Um,
Yeah.
but that's where we are.
Yeah. I mean, this is the situation we find ourselves in today, um, where I think things now it's getting dangerous now
Yeah.
because all sorts of ideologies are being imposed on society with no more evidence than anecdotal feelings. Um, you know, we had an issue here recently where um, the council um, have produced a guidance for schools on dealing with trans children. Um, and it was put out for consultation. And one of the things I immediately countered with it was, where is the pedagogical, academic research, peer-reviewed research to justify what it is you are claiming uh, these kids are experiencing? Um, there was nothing. And I said to them, well, but surely education is a science. Uh, Surely this charity that you've been referring to, which is it is a charity, but it's technically it's a political lobbying thing. This charity you've used and referred to has been working with these kinds of children for 20 years. How is it that they haven't produced any kind of academic peer-reviewed research about the experience of the children that they're working with? Um, and then read the consultation afterwards. Various notes were given, and it was said, the feedback from children experiencing transgenderism, etc., said And then, I had to say to that, well, okay, but what children? What percentage of children are there in our schools? How did you identify them, or how did they identify themselves? How do they engage in this feedback process? What? And to all these are reasonable questions to ask. Surely these are normal questions to ask. If you're going to introduce policies that affect children in schools, surely there must be evidence. Surely there must be research. Surely there must be, um, uh, recommended practices, etc., that are based on evidence. Nothing. There was nothing. It was all anecdotal, all purely ideological, um, and actually contrary to existing legislation. And of course, this is what's been exposed recently, is that Stonewall, who was a big national LGBT lobbying charity here in the UK, has been exposed for misrepresenting the law deliberately, particularly trans ideologies. So that it used to have this diversity champion scheme of government departments and local councils and big businesses and things that would sign up for it to be recognised as diversity champions. Well, they're all dropping from it like flies now, because it's been proved that the advice given is contrary to law and is only really what they would like, not actually what the law says.
Yeah, I watched a rather moving testimony from a young girl who had undergone surgery early in life as a minor, and she was supported by her parents and the physicians who treated her. But she later, she's in her late 20s, early 30s, I would think. She regrets it. She said it was a way when I was 15 years old of rebelling against society, and as a result of that immature rebellion, I'm left with a double mastectomy, and I have a gravelly voice because of the hormones I've been treated with, even though I've stopped them for years, and it'll never change. And this is my reality now. This is the scars of a decision. It was quite a moving testimony. It's when I was growing up, nobody would have thought of getting a tattoo, because it was seen as sort of, that's what sailors did or something. It was. But now everyone has a tattoo, and the more the better, and everyone's getting inked. But I'm not. This is just a perception. Okay, I'm not saying anything more than that. It's just a look at society and how it's evolved. The latest thing is, and I live next to a university, and I see the way the students dress, and that's it. But it seems like this I won't say transsexual or transgender, but I will say this gender fluid thing really has taken on a thing. It's become, I think, it's become a trend, a fad. People dabble in it to certain degrees. It's all right, dressing up and stuff, but I mean, like that young girl, I mean, she has hurt her body and her future, and my brother lives in London, right next to Goldsmiths. Good God, I mean, it's quite the sight around there, and of course they've all programs like gender studies and all this sort of thing, and. But I think it is a fad. But like any fad, you're left with the consequences. Like if you get, a tattoo, what's that going to look at like age 80?
It's
probably distorted, should we say? But that's one thing, But like that young girl, she has mutilated her body. Because of choices that she really wasn't fit to make. I mean, the argument is, and because so many people have made it from the conservative side, it's kind of brushed off. But listen to the argument. you can't smoke until you're, I don't know what the age is over there now, 16 or 18.
16 or 18.
You can't have a drink until 21 here in the United States. You can't vote or decide who your leaders will be politically until 18. You can't drive, but yet at 13 and 14, or even younger, pre-puberty, you can decide because you feel that you're born in the wrong body to change the whole direction of your adult life. It
Well,
doesn't.
and the thing is,
it makes no sense.
No.
But they pander to it.
Yeah, and of course the thing is that the evidence is as well, though, is that because there is evidence for this sort of stuff, even if the ideologues won't refer to it or use it, there is research there. And for example, most kids who experience trans confusion or identity fluidity or whatever, 90% of them by their late teens will have phased out of it.
Yeah.
90%.
Yeah.
So that's terrible. If for argument's sake, if 90% of kids went through that, had the operations, had the hormones, had the and came out the other end, and it's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy.
It really is, and it's child abuse. It really is. I mean, we're supposed to protect children, and I know, and I will admit that the church has been a bad example of that. I mean, churches, society as well.
Well, society.
All
Institutions.
All institutions, and what we're going to find out from this pandemic, and I've already heard several personal examples of this through lockdown, that domestic abuse, be it with children or spousal, has skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And it's way underreported, but we will find out over the next several years the consequences of it. It's shocking of what has happened behind closed doors.
Yeah.
So this thing is, this propensity that human beings have.
Actually, just read that, just so I don't know if this is international, but in the UK, by the way, if somebody does that, it means they need help. It means that they're enduring domestic abuse. So if if you're passing a window and somebody's in the window, looks sad, and they do that's a plea for help.
Yeah, it is international. Yeah,
it is international, is it?
Yeah. Well, certainly here. It's very important. I mean, be aware of the signs if you have any sort of dealings with the general public through your job or just living your life. Just be aware. It's very important, extremely important. I forgot what I was talking about there, or where I was going.
But the point is that this child abuse in all its various shapes and forms is far more predominant than people realise, far more prevalent.
Oh, yeah.
And every level of society, every structure in society is affected by it, from families through schools, through youth clubs, through the police, through the church, through
the BBC,
you name it, through social work, through the BBC, absolutely, the BBC, through even through social services. I mean, the number of subsequently adult but who were kids in children's homes that I've met over the years who the abuse that they endured through our social welfare system, through a social service system, it's just horrific, just terrible. And the argument being, because they didn't belong to anyone, nobody cared, and everybody thought they could do whatever they wanted to them. Just shocking, really, really shocking, just terrible.
And not as an excuse for all of this. I mean, it is absolutely. I mean, it's disgusting actually what happened. But it does pose as an example of the fact, the church is criticized often for holding up the traditional family unit. Now, if the traditional family, I know life is life and takes turns and people are people, all of that. I'm not negating that things go wrong and people are terrible characters and actors and all sorts of things. But it does not excuse, or it reinforces the fact that the church needs to uphold the paradigm model, which is a nuclear family. And, it's criticized for doing it. It was criticized recently for doing it. The German bishops wanted not to do it. But I think the church has to uphold the paradigm model, always. Not recognizing that we all are, like, you don't want to hear my confession, but I fall short of all sorts of paradigms. We all do. However, they need to be in place in order for us to amend our behavior. And so when churches or church bodies lower the bar, I guess that's a good enough expression to use, then what is there to strive for? You have to keep the bar high. When because it's delivered by our Lord Jesus Christ, that this is the best way to live, to follow in his footsteps. When you dilute that down, you're not following his footsteps.
Just pointing out to our viewers, they're just sharing that on the oldroman.com you can find an article from earlier this week from the British Spectator magazine entitled "Forget Race or Class, Marriage is the Big Social Divide." It goes on to explain that it is the lack of stable marriages and thus family units that is largely where today's societal problems stem from.
Actually, it's saying that yesterday I did a wedding, and I reminded the congregation. I said to them, you're here, and rightly so, to celebrate with the couple, to celebrate this new beginning, this love together, this beginning of a new family, this beginning of a new life where they cease to be individuals and become one, and the new pathways that may open up. But I challenged the congregation. I said, when they recite their vows in a few moments, listen to the words, because you are here as witnesses. But you're here not just in good times, but you have to be there for them in bad times. You have to be there for them for better and for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, and be with them on death till they part.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the price of a free lunch.
But that is the nature of marriage.
It is the nature of marriage.
So frustrates me. I know, and what so frustrates me with people is, marriage is a public act. People go on, it's private life. No, public marriage is a publicly registered public act, public ceremony. It's legal. It's about oaths. It's essentially a contract between the two persons. But not just between the two individuals, but with society as a whole. And the witnesses, the congregation, the families have as much responsibility as both people within the marriage to keep the marriage going, to support the marriage, to encourage the marriage, to grow the marriage, to enable it, to facilitate it, etc. This is.
But I had. I didn't stay for the meal, but I stayed a little bit afterwards for the champagne toast, and I could have stayed for the meal. Anyway, but the number of people who come up and said to me that never thought of it that way. I'm like, where have you been? You don't know this? You weren't taught this in school?
Well, no, they're not.
No,
they're not taught this. And the irony is that they're introducing here from September this new relationships and sex education curriculum, and that won't talk about it either.
Yeah. No, but you do, and to anyone who's listening, when you go to a marriage, you're locked in. You have a responsibility It really is the most expensive free lunch you're going to get. Because you have an obligation to stand with them. You've heard their vows. You've said yes to it by your presence. So you have to be there for them. Unfortunately, most people scatter like cockroaches when you turn the light on in trouble.
Well, you see, we've just had this situation here where the Health Secretary, Matthew Hancock, has apparently he has just resigned.
Apparently he did?
Actually resigned. Yeah.
I heard he had a trouble with social distancing.
But yes, he had a problem with social distancing and had an affair with somebody at work, which it turns out is somebody that he has known since university. They were at university together. Now, of course, there's all sorts of speculation now as to whether or not she was hired for her expertise or whether she was hired because she was his bit on the side or whatever. But there's all this, people going up in arms about, well, he wasn't keeping the 2 meters social distancing and so forth.
That's why I
made people saying, he's a philanderer and blah blah blah. And I had to put in a comment on a Facebook thread. I had to say, you hypocrites. Adultery is portrayed on our TV screens and in our films, all the time, and nobody bats an eyelid. If anything, you all encourage it. To suddenly, suddenly to have developed this sense of, morality about marriage, please. The hypocrisy, and likewise, the number of new relationships that have begun, during COVID, etc. Has anybody asked them how did you get together when you were 2 meters apart? But are they vilified? No. So what's this sudden moralistic outrage? It drives me mad.
Yeah, no, it really shows you the shift in values that's why I made the quip that I haven't been looking at it, but I do check in on the BBC News and I saw the thing, but most people were more outraged about the socially distancing thing than the fact that he had an affair. But you're right, and those who want to pontificate about an affair, it's like adultery it's nothing. It's accepted. It's gone the way of usury.
Just before the lockdown last year, Phil Schofield. Now, it's not a name that will mean anything to anyone on the other side of the pond. But
does to me. He used to have a gopher.
Right. Yeah, he did. Gordon. He used to be a TV children's presenter years ago here, and then he became something of a daytime TV celebrity. Well, he last year came out after 25 years or 29 years in marriage, came out, basically, admitted then that he had been unfaithful to his wife. There was rumours at the time that he was having an affair with one of the young researchers at the TV show, and that perhaps, he was being blackmailed to come out or whatever. But then there was no moral outrage about him dumping his wife for 29 years and his 2 kids and the fact that he'd been unfaithful to her. It was all bravery and courage for coming out.
Yeah, it's become an accepted convenience, just like usury.
Yeah.
Yeah. And talking about paradigms and social norms and asking people for the betterment of, for the good order of society, for the growth of society, we have lost so much. I mean, it really. I'm not going to say it feels like I am living in the end, the equivalent of the end of the Roman Empire. It's decadence, it's decay. The fabric of moral society is falling apart. I won't be around to see the end of it. People I care about might be. And I fear for it. I mourn for it. But more importantly, I pray for it. But who knows? Western civilization, starting in Europe, and it will cross the pond, it's a goner. If history is doomed to repeat itself, if we want to save it, we can. But the hourglass is filtering sand,
Well, actually, I see in that prophecy of doom, I still see.
And I'm usually the upbeat one, right?
I know. Well, if you say so. I still see the glimmer of hope, because when the empire collapsed, what survived?
Right.
The church.
From
and
Ireland.
What rebuilt society? What rebuilt society? The church.
Church, yeah.
So there is hope, brothers and sisters,
there's
for the
absolutely
future.
hope. Yeah. I'm talking about society. I wasn't talking about. But you're right. It was when the Roman Empire, when the Goths and the Visigoths and everything, Rome had fallen, and everything else, people had lost the faith. And I'm going to quip. But the Irish monks did, because it was a remote Ireland. And when I say Irish monks, I also say Scottish and Northern English, like Lindisfarne and all that. And the Welsh, and they came down and they rebuilt Europe. And Europe, as we know, to Western civilization, they retaught them what they had lost. That's why you have people with like Columbanus showing up in the middle of Switzerland somewhere.
Yeah, Willebroed in the Netherlands.
Yeah, exactly.
Willebroed in Germany.
Yeah. So the islands re-evangelized continental Europe after the empire had fallen. So absolutely, I believe that will be the case. I was listening to a while back. What's his name? The English SSPA Williamson Bishop.
Oh yeah, Bishop Williamson.
But he had an interesting thing, and this is probably a couple of years ago. He was talking about the resurgence of faith in Russia. Is perhaps Russia will re-evangelize Western Europe with their faith, because they're not as culturally affected as Western Europe and civilization. I mean, it was a theory. It was interesting. It was enough to pique my attention. Who knows?
Yeah.
What will happen? As I said, I won't be around to see it, but God is always in charge, and our eternal hope. As I always say, we've read the last chapter first, so whatever happens, we know what the end result is, and that's a great comfort to do that. So, yeah, I didn't mean to be doom and gloom. That's not what I was trying to say.
No.
But we are in a serious situation. I say that, and as much as you can, as faithful Catholics with your families, insulate your families, protect them, give them the tools they need, give them right teaching, give them prayer, stuff that will sustain them when they interact with a wider degenerate society.
Well, I think this is why it's so important, as we've said before, but in many ways we need to, as traditional Catholics, we need to retract, as it were, or what's the word? We need to come together, back to the basics, the family unit, the domestic church, personal faith and spirituality, devotion, piety, and the pursuit of holiness. And because it is from such that the resurgence in the future will will come from. That's really what we're focusing on now, is bringing together, keeping together that faithful remnant who will be the springtime after the destruction and the collapse of either the institution of the church or society as it currently is.
Yeah, and I think it'll probably be both. But I think that your expositions on the domestic church is really important at this time, because we need to start laying the foundations now. We need to remind Christians, Catholics, that remind us of our roots, and it was from the domestic church, which spread from Jerusalem all the way to Rome, and that's where it thrived. That was where the martyrs were plucked from. That was, the beginning, the flourishing of Christendom. So, it's really important, as much as you can, to build that domestic church. And the Orthodox are streets ahead of, they have the prayer corner and all of that sort of thing. And they're very much reminded of the domestic church. But we had that. We had that too.
We had that. I mean, Malta, for example, has a wonderful tradition of domestic altars, which look like miniature. You know how wonderfully Baroque churches are in Malta. Well, they have this tradition of domestic altars, which are like the Baroque altars you see in the churches in miniature, in wood, in their homes. And when the doors are closed, it looks like a very nice piece of furniture. But you open the doors and the triptych's exposed, and you pull the ments out, and it's there. And that's what we need to return to. Well,
absolutely. Yeah.
We've reached our time.
There we are.
So we'll leave you on that positive note, and it's a nice segue into reminding you that Monday evening at 6:45 is our continuing series on the domestic church. So please do join us for that. Next broadcast on this channel, of course, will be the traditional Latin Mass tomorrow morning at 8:30 for the Feast of Our Lady of Perpetual Succor, with commemoration of the 5th Sunday post-Pentecost and the octave of the Nativity of St. John the Baptist. So please do join us on that channel if you're able. That's at 8:30 a.m. BST, British Summer Time. That's GMT +1 or UTC +1. Excellency, would you give us your blessing?
Absolutely. Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Sit nomen Domini benedictum.
Et hoc ex hoc nunc et usque in saecula.
Auditorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
Qui feci caelum et terra.
Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen.
Amen. Well, it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from the other way here.
Bless you all, and we will see you next week. Take care.
Take care. Bye for now.